Okay, so welcome to the side event towards Global Declaration on Connectivity for Education. It's an event that is co-organized by UNESCO and Dubai Cares at the GPE Financing Summit. I am Sobhi Tawil, Director of the Future of Learning and Innovation team at UNESCO, and I'll be moderating the panel. I'm pleased to welcome you all, and I'm very pleased to welcome the three speakers that we have for our panel discussion today. First, Ms. Liesbet, Director of the Education Commission. Hi, Liesbet, and thank you for being with us.
Hi.
We have Ms. Sonia Jorge, Executive Director for the Alliance for Affordable Internet. Hi, Sonia.
Hello, Sobhi, and it's a pleasure to be here with all of you.
Thanks for being with us. And Alex Wong, who's Chief Special Initiatives and focal point for Giga, for the Giga initiative at the International Telecommunications Union, ITU. Hi, Alex, and thank you for being with us.
Hello everyone.
So our three speakers are all working to advance connectivity for education in their different ways and mutually enriching and complementary ways, and very pleased to have all three today for this discussion. Today we really want to explore how to best leverage connectivity and technology to make education more inclusive, more equitable, and of better quality. And our discussion will be organized around key elements of the Global Declaration on Connectivity for Education, a declaration that is currently being developed. It is being developed through a partnership between UNESCO and Dubai Cares, and it is guided by an advisory group of 20 plus experts from different institutions, organizations, and from the world of research and academia. The declaration will be launched at the end of this year in December at the RewirEd Summit in Dubai. And what the declaration does is really to propose a framework for engagement, for advocacy, and for collective coordinated action. And the starting point, I would say, is the acknowledgement that in addition to enlarging access to information and to knowledge, connected technology can enrich educational processes, can improve learning and social outcomes of education. But it's also an acknowledgement that there are risks that come with the growing use of connected technology for education, and that many of these are just emerging and coming into focus as a result of the large-scale deployments that we have seen in response to the educational disruption caused by the pandemic since the first quarter of last year. So connectivity for education needs to be properly steered, and only in doing so can we ensure that it really opens new avenues for more inclusive and more effective teaching and learning. So this is really the starting point. And the declaration is based on three core principles. And we will get the views and reactions from the speakers on each of these principles. The first principle is around centering the most marginalized. And I'll say something about that just in a minute. Centering the most marginalized. The second principle is expanding investment in free, high quality digital learning content. And third, that the digital transformation of education requires a pedagogical transformation. So starting just with the first principle, centering the most marginalized. We're all in agreement that connectivity and technology must be deployed to help close growing educational divides, but too often they benefit the more privileged learners and educators first. And it's very often the case that it's only later that efforts are made to make technological innovation and connectivity in education more inclusive and more accessible for those who are more disadvantaged. So this first principle is really about reversing that and starting the other way around and centering our policies, our investments and our strategies on the most disadvantaged, and making those solutions more easy to scale out. So the starting point really needs to be, the point of departure really needs to be how our approaches can work for students with disabilities, for refugees, for girls and women, for teachers in remote areas. This really must be the starting point in this first principle around centering the most marginalized. So it has to do with connectivity to reach all individual learners. We have the experience of Giga that can be shared. It is about ensuring sustainable financing of universal connectivity for education. It's about commitments to clear and affordable connectivity and education, connectivity for education options. And finally, it's a commitment to ensure that connected technology supplements and expands, enriches quality, formal, in-person education rather than replace it. So I'd like to perhaps first turn to Sonia on this first principle. Sonia, you're also involved in the advisory group for the development of the declaration, and interested to get your perspective from the angle of the work you do at the Alliance for Affordable Connectivity on this first principle. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Sobhi. It's really, I mean, as I said earlier, a pleasure to be here with all of you. And I couldn't be happier that that's actually the first principle of the declaration. I think it's not only a very powerful message, but one that I hope that will help the world really reframe the way we think about financing connectivity for education. One of the things that, to me, I was very pleased that that was the first principle, but that the group unanimously was very pleased with that as well. All of the different advisors from different stakeholders, that's really important. And the reason why it's important is because, sadly, the current structure of things, the current path of things has been completely the opposite. Those who are most marginalized remain marginalized. In fact, as you mentioned, the pandemic, the pandemic has really only made it even worse because it has increased the level of exclusion and inequality that those that were already marginalized were already facing. And so we really need to make an effort to redirect efforts, redirect our thinking, redirect the way we think about approaching and financing connectivity across the world. This is true everywhere. But of course, for us at the Alliance for Affordable Internet, it's most important in low and middle income countries, because that's where the greatest majority of not only the unconnected population is, but also the greatest majority of the marginalized populations lie. And that's true in Africa, where, as you know, only about 29% of the population even has access to the internet, let alone students. Most of those are adults, are not children. They are not in schools. So it's a massive problem. Also with massive gender divides. And this is true not just in Africa at levels of 80-something%, but also in Asia. We have countries in Asia, in South Asia, that have gender divides of gender gaps in the digital access in the range of 50-55%. And so, and these are kind of aggregates of the whole society of the countries. And it's true in Latin America to a certain extent as well. So we really need to rethink the way we think about connectivity, and especially connectivity for the public interest. And one of the reasons why I was very excited to participate in the process of developing the declaration and working with all of you is really that we've brought together all of our might, I would say, and our thinking and our knowledge and our resources to figure out how can we do it differently. And finally, I would say, and I hope I'm not wrong because that would be really sad for the world, I think there's great momentum, not just for folks to embrace the importance of connectivity for education, for all the points that you already raised, but also to embrace the fact that connectivity for education is a means to improve societies. It's a means to improve and to make sure that digital citizens, really, that children start and become digital citizens, educated, knowledge, digital citizens to participate in a society in a completely new way, so that, from a young age, they understand what it is to be private online, to use online platforms safely, to protect their own personal data, to communicate with their teachers, the educators, and for educators to communicate with their students and the wider education community in a safe way, but is in a way that is productive, that is useful, that will really add value to what education is. And education is the basis of all of our societies. So to me, this is a very special moment. I hope we can really harness the momentum and move forward together as a group. So I'll stop there, but I would love to share a lot more with you later on.
Thanks a lot for that, Sonia. And certainly on the last points, we will be returning to some of those on really what constitutes meaningful connectivity in education and what and the implications in terms of the types of learning, the way we see the aims, and that we prepare also learners and young people to navigate safely and productively and meaningfully the internet. Alex, perhaps over to you on this first principle from an ITU perspective, but also the experience of Giga on, as we were saying, almost reversing the perspective and ensuring that our efforts in expanding connectivity and connectivity for education in particular are not accentuating and existing divides, whatever they define them, but rather that we are looking at the most disadvantaged as our starting point. Over to you, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Sobhi. So first of all, thank you for UNESCO. Thank you for this effort, Dubai Cares as well, with the connectivity pledge. Very timely, as Sonia mentioned, building on the work, of course, of UNESCO and UNICEF and ITU, where we work together on a working group on school connectivity report in the Broadband Commission. I think Sonia and Liesbet, you were both also involved there. COVID crisis, and of course the declaration, very timely. So I think, first of all, just to add to the statistics that Sonia gave, I mean, absolutely focusing on the most marginalized is the most critical. Just some additional statistics on the connectivity. All of you know that we're now just over half of the world now being connected, but of course, in the least developed countries, the 51% connectivity goes down to 19%, so a huge gap. And then similarly on the youth, the connectivity declaration mentions 2/3 of youth are connected, but again, in the LDCs, least developed countries, it goes down to 38%. So that is the right starting point. And indeed, then turning to Giga, we designed the Gigaprojects, the project that ITU has launched with UNICEF to connect every school to the internet as a foundation, and then from that, every young person to information, opportunity, and choice, was developed with and in mind those least developed countries or those lower middle income countries. And so Giga now, which has launched in September 2019, is now active in 19 countries. We've got around $22 million in resources raised so far, which is only a fraction of what's needed, but I should recognize Dubai Cares is part of the donors that are involved with that. And we have 19 countries involved and 2,800 schools so far connected. But the key to Giga is we believe we've sort of put it into individual pieces of how we can do this. And so again, for those familiar with the Giga project, there's 4 core pillars, which is starting with mapping where every school is located, then creating the financing models that are sustainable and bring in new investors and new investments that aren't traditional in connectivity into the equation, then creating and choosing the right connectivity technologies, but also the more general connectivity business model to then supplement that. And then of course, building off of all that, then you can now empower the network with the right content and ensure that the stakeholders have the right skills. So that's Giga in a nutshell, that we're systematically applying these 4 pillars to the countries we're working in. We have so far 915,000 schools mapped. We know that there's somewhere in the order of, I think, 5 to 6 million schools. Maybe UNESCO has better numbers, but I know it's an estimate because we know that not every even country knows where every school is located. And we're talking primary and secondary. So that's what we're trying to do in Giga. Very happy that we're mentioned in the declaration and our commitment from ITU to fully support principle number 1. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Alex. And I think that's really in the spirit of what Sonia was saying earlier. I mean, it is bringing in through the work and the consultations, the experience, the expertise that has been acquired, and the experience, as you were saying, what's been learned in the case of the Giga initiative, and how to do this mapping and how to proceed on the different steps. Liesbet, obviously the Education Commission has been very much focused on issues of financing around connectivity. So good to also hear your perspective on this on this first principle. Over to you, Liesbet.
Thank you so much, Sobhi. And well, first of all, I would like to congratulate you, UNESCO, the whole team, and obviously Dubai Cares, who had the foresight of getting this work off the ground. I think this is a really great declaration. I was actually out for 2 weeks on vacation, or trying to have a vacation, and I came back and I read this and I thought, wow, this is actually a really great document. So congratulations. I think this is really setting a wonderful sort of base for things. Obviously, from the Commission side, we are very much focused also on the most marginalized, and our chair, Gordon Brown, has always been sort of at the forefront of fighting for those who are furthest behind. I think what's so interesting about this first principle is that while centering on the most marginalized has an implication for bringing connectivity to the furthest corners of the world. And so it has implications for the types of models that Alex was talking about, affordable models to bringing this connectivity to every child. It also has really important implications for thinking about the whole child. Because we know when we start thinking about children who are furthest behind, that we actually have to think about the needs of the child as a whole. And often that has actually nothing to do with connectivity. It has to do with the human aspect. And I think you, Sobhi, earlier said it shouldn't replace the human interaction. Precisely in those corners of the world where the most marginalized live, that will be even more important, because the human aspect is even more important for that child that's furthest behind, because it has a much wider array of needs. And often those needs cannot be met by other things that maybe children in wealthier contexts have access to. So I think centering on the most marginalized actually has this double thing of both really making us think about getting those connections to those furthest behind, but also really emphasizing the human importance of this, and the importance of capacity building also among the workforce, the education workforce and the teachers, to be able to engage with this connectivity. So we have actually a whole set of issues that really come to the forefront by focusing on the most marginalized. And obviously that has all sorts of implications in terms of making resources available in different formats and so on, and you talk about that as well. And I obviously has big implications for finance, but I think we'll come back to that later in principle 2 as well. So I will tell you about what we think about the financing then as well. But I wanted to, as a first piece of this, center the most marginalized, center on the whole child, center on the human complementarity of the connectivity piece.
Excellent, thanks, Liesbet, and thanks first of all for the congratulations, which is a collective I think a collective congratulations, because as Sonia started out by saying, in terms of the work with the advisory group, it is bringing some of the best experiences, expertise, and the best minds to us, and very pleased to that you've discovered the declaration, which is in development, and finding it useful in that way. I think your idea on it helps us not only in terms of strategies for connectivity, but thinking about the whole child is an important point. And because that human dimension, and as we've discovered with the school closures, that schools are more than about education, first of all, and that education is more than simply about curricula study. And this is most important. This is most important for the most disadvantaged. And that is one of the main functions of public education, of a little bit leveling the playing field and providing the opportunities and the services that go around education. So no, I think an important point on the capacity development. I think that's a perfect. Well, both actually. It's a good transition to the second principle in a sense. And the second principle is around, it's been framed around expanding investments in free, quality, high quality digital educational content. And I guess the starting point, would be to say that barriers to connected education are often seen as supply problems. They're often seen from a more technical perspective, and that is important, but that demand is also important, and that ultimately, when we're speaking about connectivity for education, that it is important that we consider beyond the connectivity issues. Finally, if connectivity is valuable for educational purposes, it is valuable because it will offer access to high quality and relevant educational content. So, and in the context of connectivity, and Sonia, I know that you use the framing of meaningful connectivity, but meaningful connectivity is in education would be connectivity that really catalyzes learning, and a few commitments related to that, and the first being financing the development and the maintenance of public options for digital education. So beyond the technical barriers, the infrastructure, the access to connected devices, but it's also the supporting the development and the maintenance of public digital learning platforms with the relevant content aligned with national curricula, which are accredited, differentiated resources, clear entry points to public digital education platforms. There is a point also, as you'll have seen in this particular principle, which is around monitoring the adaptation and application in digital education. So it's not only monitoring connected technology and access to connected technology, it's also efforts to adapt and apply in meaningful ways connected technology to education. And I think this is, if I may, one of the novel aspects, perhaps, also of the declaration is to bring in precisely there's a lot about connectivity and connectivity for education, but still perhaps related to the wider challenges around ensuring universal and our efforts towards universal connectivity. But here to bring in also the educational, not to lose sight of the educational, the public purposes of education, and as we will see in the third principle, the pedagogical implications of that. But enough from me on that. On that second principle, perhaps Liesbet, since you ended on that note, perhaps you'd like to take up some of, or continue some of those ideas in relation to the second principle on expanding investments in free, high quality digital educational content. Over to you, Liesbet.
Well, thank you so much. And I think this principle, again, is one where we first sort of saying, focus on the child, the whole child. This is about the system. I think you're really bringing home here that the connectivity issue needs to be set within the entire system. And we have, under the Global Education Forum, which has also endorsed this work on the declaration, had lots of discussions about this complementarity and about the need to invest not only in the connectivity, but also in the complementary pieces. And I would say, I would agree with Sonia and Alex that I've really enjoyed the collaborative spirit that has been emerging over the past year between different sectors, between different actors who all realize that we are a part of the puzzle. So while Giga is really focusing on the connectivity issue, we at the Education Commission, and I'm actually in London at the moment for the Global Partnership for Education Summit as well. The GPE is also there providing funding for that complementary piece. Now, the complementary investments, UNICEF has made estimates of this, which were also presented to the Global Education Forum, where they kind of say it's probably about 10% of the total cost. So in a way, that's a small cost because all the rest is really about sort of these important pieces of infrastructure and so on. But it's an absolutely critical cost that needs to be met in order to achieve our objectives of having every child connected and bringing digital learning. And the way we've been looking at this is, okay, we can provide to some extent grants as an international community, but in a lot of countries, the grants will not be enough. And we need to think about innovative finance mechanisms to bring sufficient funding to address this problem. Obviously, governments themselves need to invest, but they will also need support from the international community. And many of you know that the Commission has been working with the multilateral development banks on an international finance facility for education, which actually would be incredibly good complement to the Giga structure. And we're actually in close collaboration with Giga to see, okay, we've got these different pillars under Giga that are trying to get the financing for the connectivity piece. How can we also bring in the innovations that we've been working on to help complement and provide the resources to invest in the content and in all these other pieces. And I'd say as a last piece, what also was emphasized under the Global Education Forum is that it's incredibly critical that we think about planning in this context and that we can align all the pieces. It's the planning of the connectivity and the hardware pieces, the planning of the content, it's the planning of the human resource change that is needed and so on. And I know that's something that your team, you, Sobhi and Mark as well, have emphasized a lot. So we're having an effort also under the GEF to think about country planning and making sure that all these pieces of the ecosystem can align.
Great, thanks, Liesbet. Sonia, over to you.
Thank you, Sobhi. First, I mean, I wanted to say thank you, Liesbet, for emphasizing the human child and you know, the whole child, you know, as of course the center of a lot of the work. I think that's critical. And I don't think, I think all the work that is being done in this space, or I would want to believe, is very much from that perspective. When it comes to connectivity for education, what I would like to note here is there's a couple of things, and I want to focus on the content specifically, which is the second principle that is so important: free and high quality content. What is content? Who does content? Who shapes the content? Who's you know, developing content? From our perspective and from the perspective of meaningful connectivity, as you were mentioning, Sobhi, we think of meaningful connectivity in a much more holistic way. We start with the technical foundation, which, as you know, we at A4AI, at the Alliance for Affordable Internet, have defined that foundation. But that foundation is very much defined because It's what allows for the opportunity of all the other elements that come on top, right? And why is it important to note that? And this is some work that we're doing also with the ITU and other colleagues through the digital cooperation framework, is how do we then think of meaningful connectivity in that holistic way that integrates all of these elements, that makes connectivity work for people, work for educators, work for students, and not just the other way around, right? It needs to be a virtuous cycle of interaction where everything is focused on, is it useful? Can I have agency to determine how I use the information? Do I have agency to determine how I will educate my students, etc.? And this is important because meaningful connectivity is about connecting all those dots and making sure that we have the right kind of connectivity, but making sure that that connectivity is what will support all of those different options that are absolutely critical to advance education, right? To advance education systems, to support educational frameworks, to advance even pedagogical methods, etc., etc. And to me, this is really important as you come back to content, because the truth is the content is not there. High quality and especially free content, it is not there. And it's especially not there for those that we've defined to be our focus in this declaration, which are the most marginalized. So think about being a marginalized person anywhere in the world. Is the content that is available relevant, useful, directly connecting to those who are marginalized? I would doubt. For the most part, the content that is available, not only it's not free, but is developed from a different kind of framework. And I would say here, I would like to challenge all of us to not just invest significantly in content development, as Liesbet was saying, but make sure that content is recognized, as others in our sector actually have argued for a long time, that content is knowledge. And the advent of content and the collection of content that is necessary for public education and that should be available for free is core to making sure that education is possible. Now, if connectivity is at all useful in this whole equation, it needs to facilitate that. It needs to facilitate content development. It needs to facilitate the sharing of content, different ways of sharing, different kinds of methodologies. Alex has worked quite a bit on these in his previous positions. I remember these, and he can tell us more about it. Being creative about sharing content, right? Not all students are going to understand and engage with content through technology. The content may come through technology to the teacher, but then on a one-on-one between the educator and the child, as Liesbet was saying, again, focusing on the human child. And it's understanding all of these connections that makes it really important. So for me, from our perspective, even though we focus on technology and connectivity has to have a purpose. And to me here, the purpose is really centering technology on where is going to be most useful, where is going to make it so that when, I hope we don't have another pandemic, but as we continue to get out of this pandemic, how is it going to be useful so that kids and educators will, first of all, continue to have an education and continue to have that education in the best way possible in their own context.
Thanks, Sonia. And I think, you're mind that meaningful connectivity is about connecting these different pieces. It's also, Liesbet, what you were saying in terms of the challenge for planning. I mean, we know that in education systems, regardless of technology, we already have a challenge of, coordinated, putting all the pieces together. I think with technology, that's adding, additional dimensions to that. But here, with the principle is really that content is an important piece that is often overlooked, but content needs to be relevant. And I think really always good for us all to be reminded that ultimately, technology and connectivity is in the service of human development, and in this case, in the service of education. So as far as content, it is about developing meaningful, relevant content, and that in itself is an important area of focus. Alex, over to you on.
Yeah, thanks, Sobhi. So I'm actually going to take a different perspective on principle 2 here. I won't try to get into the digital public goods and the content itself, which I know UNESCO is doing a lot of work on itself, as well as UNICEF with the work on the Secretary General Roadmap on digital public goods. I'll actually take a different angle on another program that ITU has launched with the Digital Impact Alliance, DIAL, as well as the governments of Germany and Estonia. And it's basically what we call a whole of government approach to digital transformation of government services. So this is fundamentally that as governments roll out their digital services, education being a great example of one key sector, that there's a lot of challenges because the software as it's rolled out is not being done in a coordinated fashion. There's lots of silos, there's a lot of interoperability problems. So this whole project that we've launched is to propose to governments that if you can step back and take a whole of government building blocks approach, we can identify in a way APIs or individual software units that are reusable. And if they can be done efficiently in an open source manner off the shelf, then you can develop content in a more coordinated fashion that allows more interoperability and ultimately better value for the government, and then hopefully better ultimate value to the community. And so this project, it's called GovStack, by the way, has started, and we have identified that there's 4 use cases to focus on: one in agriculture, one on health, one on payments, and one on education. So I think this idea that making sure we have the quality relevant content, as both Sonia and Liesbet referred to, is absolutely critical. Having the right underlying technical architecture and how a country can roll this out using a common foundational architecture, so you're not creating silos. So for the user, for the remote learner, he or she, whether it's a young person or an adult, can follow and use the same set of common applications as they access the content. There's a great case study that's been laid out that ties to remote learning, and as an example where you can standardize the workflow of perhaps how somebody could be using and accessing remote, education content, in this case literacy, through a remote case study. Here's just as an example, and I'll refer people, they can search it up on the internet under the GovStack project, but there's an example of that. If you break down someone that's outside of the school who's trying to access an app who has a literacy issue, you can break that workflow down to recognizing that they have a problem, being made aware that there's a mobile app that they could use, registering for that app, working through the actual content of that app, and then receiving some kind of a certification. So if you break down these workflows in a way, you can then create the right software off-the-shelf components that then form the building blocks to create the broader content. So maybe it's a bit of a different angle. It's not highlighted in the declaration, but it could be something we could be happy to see how we can weave that into as a very fundamental way of building and ensuring that content is being done efficiently through a common technical architecture approach. Back to you, Sobhi.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for bringing up important points. I mean, one on just recalling the whole of government approach, which resonates with what was being said about also the complexity of and additional dimensions of connectivity in education. Also the issue of digital public goods, but that we haven't time to get into here, and on the last examples you were giving. But perhaps in we have a little under 10 minutes just to move to the 3rd principle, and it is about the pedagogical transformation that is required. Just that we have a chance to say a word here, and perhaps if we have a little time to add in something on examinations and connectivity, which is not quite dealt with here in the declaration. On this 3rd principle, just to recall, it is that the digital transformation of education requires pedagogical transformation. We know that digital spaces can foster more effective pedagogies, they can expand student knowledge experiences, nurture creativity, but we also know the reverse side, that they can impose limitations on students and teachers and constrain the learning experience and even intellectual freedom. So it is about, the third principle is it is about ensuring that the digital transformation of education actually opens learning possibilities rather than reduce them. So it is about committing to advancing new paradigms and possibilities for learning. It is about using technology to also strengthen the social and civic dimensions of learning. And again, we've seen that, we saw that during the school closures. We were reminded of the important dimensions of learning, and connectivity can, in terms of the social and civic learning, also help to create and support and create new experiences. It is also about, finally, and we mentioned it earlier, about protecting, ensuring safe, productive use of the internet, learning how to navigate responsibly, and also issues around protecting data of both students and learners. So perhaps a quick word from each of you, just on any angle on that more pedagogical perspective. Perhaps Liesbet, if you'd like to start.
Great, thank you. And I think this is another really great principle, because the wonderful thing is that the evidence has shown us over the past decade or so that the key to improving learning is to make learning more adaptive, more interactive, and more inclusive. And those three things all can actually be done with the help of technology. And we've struggled over the past decades to actually make adapting of learning, so teaching at the right level, make that available to all children, because it has always been something that's just for the wealthy, that can have a teacher with a small group of people. It never was actually possible for everyone. But what we've learned in the work that the Commission has been doing in a project called High Touch, High Tech, is that now technology offers us an opportunity to make that adaptive, interactive teaching and learning available to all. But it needs to be done in a way that combines the high touch and the high tech. So coming back to that earlier point about the transformation needed in the workforce and the education workforce, the teachers, the teaching assistants, everybody who's involved in teaching and learning, we need to fundamentally rethink that. We've been doing a project in Vietnam on high touch, high tech, where we have tried to implement this idea in 7th grade maths. We've seen improvements in learning in one semester equivalent to 2 years. That is just an amazing amount of progress. And more importantly, it's those who are furthest behind who are showing the most progress. So what we've been doing in our work in the High Touch, High Tech, and also through the Global Education Forum, is starting to think about how could we actually scale this model across the world. And that will, again, need us to look at the ecosystem, paying attention, obviously, to those furthest behind. But so I think this is such an important topic. And I think technology offers an opportunity to transform education for the better, if done right.
Okay, great. Thanks, Liesbet, for that. Sonia, and then Alex, and then I would like to come to that final question before we close on connectivity and examinations. Just because, yeah.
I
Sonia,
think Liesbet
please,
said it all. Yeah, sure. I was going to say, I think Liesbet said it all, and she's the education expert. I certainly am not. But what I would say from our perspective is I always remind people, and this is, I think, really telling for this particular principle, technology must work for the people. It's not people work technology. We don't need to make technology relevant just because of it. We need to make technology really be relevant and useful for people. And if we do that, when it comes to pedagogy or to teaching, to education methods, that will come together. You know, it goes back as far as things like what Paulo Freire used to tell us, you know, in the early days of educational theory in other contexts. It's teaching to the people what they need to have, what they want to have, and not the other way around. So I'll just stop there.
No, great. No, I think, I mean, an important point, a simple point, but a powerful point about keeping things in perspective. I mean, things will work in the right direction if we keep in mind that technology and connectivity here is in the service of education and in the service of more inclusive, more effective, more relevant and better quality outcomes. Alex, over to you. Any thoughts on the pedagogical aspect?
No, again, I think it's great, triad of principles, very complementary. So I think that's a great framework. As Liesbet said, I'll just mention, of course, under one of the principles about safety and protection, and the safe use, of course, is child online protection. And that's a big separate topic, or it's a big topic that should be part of, tied into this declaration. A big program that we've been doing at the ITU together with UNESCO, UNICEF, many others for many years now. And how can we make sure that when kids use the internet, that it's done safely? We've created videos with a very character called Sango. I'm looking at the video right now to sort of get the message across on how to access the internet in a safe way, and that the content that's being used it meets the right standards. So I would just add that great third principle that complements 1 and 2, because we've got to remember all the things that really then make that content really meaningful and useful. And then I'll just leave that point related to the specific angle of child online protection, which is now even more important than ever with the COVID crisis.
Absolutely, absolutely. No, thanks for that. Thanks for that, Alex. If we can just take a few moments for those who among you three who would like to come in on that, but I can't help it because it is an extension of the work on this third principle, if you want, not quite in the declaration, but work we are doing with also with Dubai Cares and looking into starting to look into the issue of connectivity in examinations, and the fundamental contradiction of saying, digital transformation of our societies, transforming all facets of our lives, from entertainment to work to education to the way we socialize and communicate to even politically mobilize, and acknowledging that and advancing, recognizing the human capacity gaps in connectivity for education and the importance of digital skills at all levels of students themselves and teachers and managers and beyond that. And then a fundamental contradiction that in high-stake examinations, in practically all cases, we forbid access to the internet. So here we are preparing for the world that is connected, and in a key moment, a key educational moment of validating learning, we are actually prohibiting, and in extreme measures, even turning off the internet countrywide to avoid access to the internet, cheating, and to ensure, maybe on the more positive side, to ensure fairness in examinations, but examinations which may resemble more 19th century forms of assessment in a world that is increasingly connected. So any thoughts? It's a little provocative, but it was just to have your inputs and your thoughts. Who would like to go first on this one?
I'm happy to. So this is a very, interesting topic, and one that could go on for yet another session, right? But just 2 things here. One is, first, it makes absolutely no sense to shut down the internet, to restrict the internet because of national exams. I mean, frankly, we are much smarter technically to actually, even if it was important to restrict to a certain room, you can do that. There's many ways to do that, but that's a different story. It's just against a basic principle of access. I would say also, as my second point, that if anything, I think the pandemic actually showed educators and many others that a lot of kids were doing exams online. I mean, my own children were taking exams online in multiple ways. And if they are smart enough to be able to find information and quickly analyze it and write about it or answer, that is a skill. That is a skill that many of those who have been defining education for many years didn't have and need to also learn. That's an important skill. That's where technology and access to the internet can actually be useful. So are exams something that we have to just simply take out of our heads without any help of any tools? I would question that, frankly. I think that's a question for educators, and the transformation of education needs to also include the transformation of methodologies that can improve with educational process, with technology processes. And I think access to the internet is one of those. So I'll stop there. I think you know where I'm getting, but I would love to go on forever.
Oh, thanks. I see, Alex, perhaps you'd like to comment on this.
As a parent who's
perspective on ensuring universal connectivity.
Okay, I'll make 2 quick points, and I know time is late, but I'm also speaking as a parent of a kid who just finished his IB International Baccalaureate. Definitely the pedagogy of letting kids use technology to do their homework, to be in class, needs to change. And what he was doing with an iPad in taking notes, downloading material, marking it up, I mean, it was amazing. I couldn't even follow how he's learning now, but it is so different than how we learned. And so I agree with Sonia, it's only natural in the exam somewhere, they should be tested on that. Now, maybe not all of it, maybe part of it needs to be online. That's the first point. The second point I'll make was my son, who also had the benefit to visit some universities pre-COVID, got to sit in a class in a very nice, prestigious university, and the exercise the professor gave the class, so he pretended he was he was there with a friend. But the exercise was that the professor gave a bunch of cards and said, okay, guys, you guys got to figure out how this game works. And for the whole class, these students, all university computer science students in a very well-known university, nobody really figured it out. And at the end, he said, the lesson you guys should have learned was, why don't you just look it up on the internet? So the point being, that is the life skill. So anyways, I'm not answering directly your question. I know outside of exams, seeing what my son did, the school had to adapt and realize that kids are learning a different way and much more faster and smarter than we ever were. Over back to you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for those thoughts. Liesbet, any?
Yeah, I think that as Sonia said, we could probably sit here for a few more hours. I would say the transformation of education needs also a transformation of assessments. I think one of the things that we have emphasized also on the Global Education Forum and also the Save Our Future white paper last year was that with the advent of technology comes the advent of using that technology for data curation and learning more about the students. So when you think about adaptive and AI sort of applications, there is a whole world of out there in terms of new types of assessments, because if you individualize the learning, you can also start benchmarking the sort of assessments against the individual's benchmark. So I think there's a huge amount of work out there. And I think your team, Sobhi, I know at the HTHT, the High Tech High Touch Summit a few weeks ago, one of your colleagues was on a panel actually making the point that AI could potentially be used to roll out summative assessments and remote examination. I think you are actually thinking about this more than anybody. So maybe we should let you have the last word on this.
No, thanks for that. Well, I mean, I would take the angle that and you said it, Liesbet, that assessment is actually a strategic area of intervention in pedagogy. I mean, regardless of connectivity or not. But if we do see high-stake examinations as allowing for the use of the internet, we're actually introducing a complete paradigm shift that will have a domino effect working backwards from the examination. It will force transformation of pedagogical methods, of what we see as important, of what skills we're aiming to develop. I mean, as you were saying, Sonia, what is important finally, what reflects, as you were saying, Alex, the real life situations. I mean, what are the types of competencies that we need? And an intervention like that could just have a backward sort of domino effect positively on on teacher training, on curriculum design, on pedagogies, on so that's I'd leave it at that for now. But just to thank you all, and just to say we are looking forward. Again, the declaration is something, it's been an excellent so far in developing this declaration. and it's a declaration which is still in development to be launched at the RewirEd Summit in December. So looking forward to, to continuing to shape that and through that to have these conversations, but also to bring in and to really leverage, the expertise and the particular angles, the experience that has been gained through the work of the different partners, organizations, institutions, networks. But perhaps Saeed from Dubai Cares, over to you for perhaps the last word.
Thank you very much, Sobhi. I just wanted to really thank the esteemed panelists for being part of this session, and really just wanted to give a word to the UNESCO team for really helping us in curating and facilitating this session, and also leading the work behind the declaration. I think we couldn't have had a better partner in this. We're very proud to be working with all of you in one capacity or another, for sure, on this. And digital learning and connectivity has been one of our core work streams since the beginning of pandemic, and even before, as we started working in the education and emergency space, where these issues and disruptions to learning were very apparent. And of course, they became even more magnified with the pandemic. I think the message is very clear from our leadership that the declaration cannot just be something that is launched, celebrated, and signed, but it needs to be something that is operational. And we really want to use it as the framework to really think about how we can engage further with much more stakeholders on making this a reality. So we really look forward to welcoming you in December, where we launch, discuss, and really strategize on how we can make this a reality on the ground. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saeed, and thank you to our three speakers, Sonia, Jorge, Liesbet Steer, and Alex Wong. Thank you very much for being with us and for sharing your perspectives. Looking forward to continuing our work together and our dialogues in different venues and at different moments in the coming months. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.